So I've been watching some interesting content and I want to give the boxing philosophy perspective. So let's open that door and explore 11 ideas. And the first idea is that Kell Brook has confirmed the comeback without saying a single name. A massive fight is coming, and the guess is Chris Eubank Jr. So it's important to establish why is Kell Brook coming back? Why? Does he need the money, or is it purpose driven? And the next big thing, and this is a huge thing, is who is in the corner? Who is in the corner? If Dominic Ingle is in the corner, then I'm far less concerned because Dominic Ingle has a tremendous wealth of experience. If Dominic Ingle isn't in the corner, then I am concerned. And then the next thing after that, and this is really crucial, is who is he fighting? If, for example, he's fighting Chris Eubank Jr., that could be a competitive fight. It could be a good fight. But if he's fighting a young, audacious, upcoming lion, then that could turn out badly. And that's something that the British fans in particular would not like to watch. The point is this: matchmaking is key in this comeback. If Dominic Ingle is in the corner, there is, figuratively speaking, safe hands. And if Chris Eubank Jr. fights Kell Brook, who is the favourite? Kell Brook looks sensational in his last fight against Amir Khan. But Chris Eubank Jr., how did he look? He looked tired, dehydrated, unmotivated, and extraordinarily flat. This could be a relatively big fight in Britain. It could be a big fight if the marketing is done correctly. So I guess here a comeback is not dangerous because of age alone. It becomes dangerous when purpose, matchmaking, and guidance are wrong. And then the next idea is that no one can call it. Apparently, some feel it's a 50-50 fight. But is it a 50-50 fight? And is a 50-50 fight more valuable to boxing than a world title fight? This fight is not just big or potentially big because it's 50-50. Let me explain. It's big because of the branding. It's big because of the branding of both boxers. Kell Brook was a great British champion. His last fight, of course, was settling a rivalry with Amir Khan, another great fighter. Chris Eubank Jr. was a respected contender that had a scintillating fight with Conor Benn. It was a great piece of marketing, but the first fight was a totally, absolutely vicious affair. And also Chris Eubank Jr.'s dad was a great champion and very well respected. When you put these ingredients together, that really gets the public's attention. And I think the appropriate context is important here, because the public does not buy uncertainty alone. It buys uncertainty attached to names, history, and emotion. And then the next idea is that Brook is 40. He's 40 and he hasn't fought in 4.5 years. And it barely matters, the logic. Well, what is the logic? The logic is that Eubank's last performance, respectively speaking, was bad. Of course, there are questions about Kell Brook. How much does he have left? Does he still have that great jab? Does he still have that great timing? But there are massive questions on Chris Eubank Jr. Chris Eubank Jr. identity, think of it, his identity was of a pressure fighter and that of an iron chin. Subtract the pressure, subtract the iron chin. What do you have? The rehydration clause in the rematch and in the first fight made him additional millions, but that may have cost him additional millions in later parts of his boxing career, because in the rematch with Conor Benn, he simply could not make the right adjustments. He started the fight, Chris Eubank Jr. started the fight looking angry. He looked very angry, but then he finished the fight looking ambiguous. I don't want to say looking defeated, but his body language in the first fight and the body language in the second fight, the comparison is night and day. And it was, like I said, it was ambiguous. It was a weird experience. To his credit, though, when Chris Eubank Jr., when he hit the floor, he got back up. But it looked like Chris Eubank Jr. was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. And perhaps from his perspective, he was carrying the weight of the world. And another concern with Chris Eubank Jr. is who is the trainer? Because the lack of consistency and the lack of leadership is definitely a red flag. Because sometimes the biggest question is not what a fighter has left, it is whether he still knows who he is. So Kell Brook and Eubank Jr., it's a money fight, not a title fight. And Ben Shalom is the first to say so. He states, as long as they're not pretending they're world champions, there's still a place for them. I think this framing really helps. If older fighters are fighting each other, the context changes. And I think that Kell Brook, I think he misses fighting. And when it's a part of your identity, when it's a part of your purpose, it's hard to walk away. And even if you do walk away, how long can you walk away for? Now, Dominic Ingle and his team, they will give him sound advice. Let's be honest, Dominic Ingle is an intelligent man and he will guide him accordingly. And they can guide him and they can maximize his boxing skill. If Kell Brook was a 10 in his prime, maybe they can get him to like a 7 or an 8. But for Chris Eubank Jr., the story is different. There are, from an outsider looking in, there are no mentors. There is just pure independent thought. And maybe that's not always a good thing. The negotiation process, which got him additional millions, may have cost him millions in health. Chris Eubank Jr., I believe, is a smart man. But we all need effective guidance. If Chris Eubank Jr. does not rediscover his abilities, and when I say abilities, I'm talking about his boxing abilities, this could be another bad night. Another bad night. Now think of Chris Eubank Jr.'s identity. Now his new identity is of an intelligent boxer. Will that work against Kell Brook, who's really good at boxing? I think he needs to fight Kell Brook. But will the alleged hand injuries, will they hold up? Will Chris Eubank Jr.'s team be able to find something in him? Will they be able to maximize his potential? It's important to recognize here that independence can create freedom, but even intelligent fighters need people who can see what they cannot. And then the next idea is that this has Zuffa fingerprints all over it. And what we're talking about here is the Riakporhe contract drama, which, according to some, isn't a fighter's choice, it's a company war. People in boxers' ears saying, we can get you this, we can get you that. It sparks the question, who really decides a fighter's career? Is it the fighter or is it the people whispering? And there is speculation that Zuffa wants to sign Riakporhe. Considering the nature of Riakporhe's latest victory, which was an entertaining victory, this is understandable. But here's a question. How can Zuffa help Riakporhe's career? Yes, they can pay a large check. But if the champions are with rival promoters, that can create obstacles. Of course, we have to ask the question, what is the currency of champions in today's climate? Of course, money can remove those obstacles, but perhaps not all money is good money, but not all money is bad money. Surely it's the context. In the end, maybe it's just about the terms and conditions. Ideally, you want a big upfront payment included with incentive-based payments and a level of flexibility. So if things don't work out, you can walk away. Additionally, if your current promoter wants to keep you, they need to either match the payment or provide a great payment incentive and also match the flexibility. Is it money over loyalty? Is it loyalty over money? Or is it a combination of both? Again, you could consider that a philosophical question. In my experience, mutual interest is always the greater currency. It may not be the currency, but in my experience is the greater currency, meaning we do business to mutually help each other. No snake tactics, just pure transparency and a want for your people to succeed. Unfortunately, it appears many people don't think like this. To me, bad money is partly when it attaches you to bad people. So if I was Riakpur, if I was in Riakpur's position, I would be establishing who are the ethical operators and see if I can negotiate an optimal contract with them. Because in a sense, the best contract is not always the biggest check. Sometimes the quality of the people attached to the money matters more. And in capitalism, that's a huge statement. And the next idea is that Shalom says that fighters get gassed up by outsiders who don't take the risk. They're not the ones in the firing line. Shalom is presenting himself as the good guy. But is he the good guy? Are there any good guys in boxing? Are there any good people in the world? I mean, Shalom may be criticizing promoters of certain tactics, but does he not use those tactics? Who are the snakes in this boxing jungle? And do snakes admit that they're snakes? Capitalism, of course, can be a great thing, but perhaps capitalism can reveal some Machiavellian tendencies because the stakes are very high. People will sacrifice. They will sacrifice their ethics for likes, but they will sacrifice even more for money. Well, that's the premise, and you have to decide whether if you agree with that premise. To some, it's just a game of power, a literal game of snakes and ladders. What promoter, think of this, what promoter is trying to build a culture that provides boxers a pension or financial literacy? You often see the snakes through their actions and not through their words. And that's how we can paint a picture of who is telling the truth and who is not. Think of this. In a business built on persuasion, character is revealed less by what people promise and more by what they repeatedly do. And the next idea is that there's another injunction, and Shalom's legal threat is his only real weapon. He got a successful injunction in September, and he'll do it again. Here's a question. Is the modern promoter really a lawyer with a promotional banner? It feels like legalities can really destroy the purity of boxing. With that being said, the legal system, I assume, is to hold people ethically accountable. Many see the legal system as a game as opposed to a real system of morality. In my experience, solicitors are masters of minimization, self-interest, and the currency of truth does not really matter. It's ironic when the players in the system undermine their own system. Disclaimer, this is purely anecdotal. There may be good lawyers, good solicitors. Maybe they're out there. Maybe they start good and become corrupted by the system. And I think it's important to remember that systems are created to protect fairness, but a system loses its meaning when winning the game becomes more important than finding the truth. And this leads to the next idea of Martin Bakole, who may have ruined his career by earning too much money. Multi-millionaire, lost the hunger, missed fights, came in overweight. Is this the biggest threat to heavyweights? Not an opponent, but a full bank account. Martin Bakole. In a sense, is it a success story? Is it a sad story? The marketing and the performance against Anderson gave him huge credibility. He looked amazing that night. Also, according to him, he was the undisputed sparring champion of all time. Let's get that right. But the Joseph Parker fight, it was a huge risk. It was an absolutely huge risk. No camp, no preparation, let's be honest, grossly out of shape, and a sharp Joseph Parker. It was a recipe for absolute destruction. And for 1.5 rounds, Bakole did good. And he looked terrifying as well. He looked intimidating. But a well-placed right, I think it was a right hand to the temple, ended the fight and created major doubt in his credibility. This was the world stage, a massive opportunity to shine. That caused his downfall. Was it bad management? Was it poor conditioning? Or was it a calculated risk gone wrong? Because sometimes you got to roll the dice, but you don't always get the 6. And like I said, sometimes careers are not destroyed by one defeat. They are damaged by the decisions that made the defeat possible, because bad decisions, they compound. And then the next idea, which is following on with the Bakole thing, is that talent doesn't work if you don't put in the graft. Shalom's verdict on Bakole. Why does Bakole come in such bad shape? He looks like he's in bad shape. He clearly needs a nutritionist. He needs a team that will reinforce dedication and discipline. Make no mistake, I think Bakole needs to be big. That's part of his identity, but there's being big and effective, and there's being big and sluggish. It looks like he may have some poor eating habits and some poor discipline habits, and I say that with respect because he has tremendous talent. But he needs to address those bad habits. And that takes good mentorship. That takes an optimum boxing environment. That takes accountability. Ultimately, what does it take? Ultimately, it takes discipline. And some people don't naturally have discipline. They have to learn it. Bakole may have exceptional talent. Absolutely exceptional talent. But that does not replace a lack of dedication and a lack of consistency. And many of us can learn from the Bakole story. And it's important to realize that talent can create the opportunity, but discipline decides how much of that opportunity survives. So the next idea is that Adam Aziz is 15-0 with 12 KOs and the IBF title sitting vacant. And he's next in line, basically. Shalom wants him to win a world title before the Dalton Smith fight. I guess the question here is, why would you avoid the money fight until the belt is secured? And sometimes delaying the biggest fight is not avoidance. It is increasing your leverage before entering negotiation. And I think in boxing, and particularly in capitalism, leverage is absolutely essential. And then the final idea is that boxing, is it a sport? Is it a business? A comeback? A contract war? A missing champion? And a vacant title? When did the boxing ring become a boardroom with gloves? I would contend that boxing is a sport and a business. Of course, the premise here is that two things can be true at the same time. But does the boxing or does the business compromise the sport? It's a good question. The business of boxing supports the boxer that generates the most revenue. So the business of boxing supports the boxer that generates the most revenue. That is definitely business. So just because a boxer generates money does not mean that he's elite. However, Canelo generates a lot of money, but Canelo is an elite operator. So he fights at an elite level and he makes elite money. So this is where it aligns. A great boxer that is not doing well, what's happening? What's happening when a great boxer is not doing well in the business of boxing? What's the root cause? Is it a promoter issue? Is it a marketing issue? Is it a boxing style identity issue? The job of boxing perhaps is mastery and entertainment. In boxing, success is not guaranteed. It's absolutely not guaranteed. We see survivorship bias in the algorithm all the time. We see the 1% time and time again. You know, you see the Floyd Mayweathers, you see the Shakur Stevensons, but it's not guaranteed. That's the 1%. However, even though it's not guaranteed, even though it's the 1%, it's still possible. Unlikely, but it's possible. And in many cases, a great boxer will have a great team. And I think, you know, having that great talent, but having a great team is essential. A great promoter to get good financial splits. A great trainer to get the right strategy, the right mindset, and an optimum boxing environment, and a mentoring process that will make the best version of themselves. So a boxer, I think, one of the outcomes that they want is to become the best versions of themselves. That's the most essential thing. And in the instance of boxing, it's not just a business. It's not just a sport. It's a philosophy. And boxing is where skill, money, identity, and risk collide. That is why it becomes more than a sport or a business. Again, it's a philosophy. So let's finish this off with 7 questions. Question 1. Is Kell Brook returning because he still has something to prove, or because boxing is too deeply tied in his identity to leave behind? I feel that Kell Brook still loves boxing. Like there's a relationship there, and he still wants to be part of boxing. I don't know his financial situation, but I feel that this might not be purely financially driven. So I'm not sure if he's trying to prove something with regards to himself or if he has world title aspirations, but I think he feels a level of comfortability with his identity of a boxer and being in the ring. And it's always good to enter a boxing ring because you want to, not because you have to. The second question, if Brook fights Chris Eubank Jr., is this really a 50-50 fight, or are we judging both men through nostalgia? Kell Brook is a former great champion. Chris Eubank Jr. is a former good contender. However, their weights are slightly different. First of all, the weight is going to determine a lot. Are they both going to be fighting at an optimum weight? And considering what's happened in Chris Eubank Jr.'s past, does he even have an optimum weight? Does Chris Eubank Jr. have any durability left? Chris Eubank Jr.'s identity was based on punch resistance and high pressure, and he seems to have lost both of those things. A Chris Eubank Jr. who's trying to be cerebral, trying to work behind the jab, use angles. I'm not sure if Kell Brook is an 8 or even a 7. I'm not sure that Chris Eubank Jr. has any chance against Kell Brook. But at the same time, what does Kell Brook have with regards to timing and speed? Kell Brook was great with his timing, great with his accuracy. You take away his accuracy, and then he is deeply restricted. I'm not sure if it's 50-50. There's so many variables, and the context is important. The camp and the preparation and the trainers and the strategy will be absolutely essential. But I don't think it's 50-50. I can understand why people might lean towards Chris Eubank Jr., and I really like Chris Eubank Jr. I love the way Chris Eubank Jr. markets, and I love the way he's loquacious and how he puts the words together. But I think with regards to ability, and with regards to punch resistance, I feel like Kell Brook might have a slight edge, but it's important to remember that Kell Brook was damaged psychologically and physically in the Triple G fight in particular, and you could say in the Errol Spence fight. So they both will have punch durability issues, but I think those last 2 fights with Conor Benn, I think they've taken so much out of Chris Eubank Jr. that it'll be very hard for him to retain any type of form. The third question is, has Chris Eubank Jr. lost the qualities that once made him dangerous? Pressure, durability, and confidence. Confidence is a funny thing. Has he lost his confidence? I'm pretty sure that he's probably still a very confident man. However, he must have some questions about his durability when he has that conversation with himself, but he probably still has confidence in his abilities. He doesn't seem to be a pressure fighter because he's made a tactical adjustment of changing his boxing identity. Can he still be a pressure fighter? That is a question that I guess only he can answer. Does he want to be a pressure fighter? Allegedly, he has hand issues. So can he be a pressure fighter? Would he have to change? If he was a pressure fighter, would he have to be a different type of pressure fighter? For example, Joe Calzaghe had hand issues, and the way he dealt with those hand issues was to take the power off the punches. So he would like throw what some people would call arm punches, and people would criticize him for that. But this was an innovative approach to help him to be able to throw lots of punches without compromising his hand health. So for me, for Chris Eubank Jr. to regain any type of, to regain any type of quality or to retain any type of standard, he would need to make significant adjustments. His training team would be a good indication of whether he could make those adjustments. And then the fourth question is, how important is the right trainer in the comeback? And should Dominic Ingle be essential for Kell Brook? Of course, when Dominic Ingle wasn't in the corner for Kell Brook, that was against Crawford. And he was actually doing well for 3 rounds, but then he got stopped in the 4th round. But you do wonder, you feel like, obviously that was a great performance by Crawford, and Crawford is a great fighter, an elite fighter. But you do wonder, if Dominic Ingle was in the corner, would the preparation have been different, and would it have been a different Kell Brook? Because I think Kell Brook is a product of the Dominic Ingle style. So you take Dominic Ingle away from Kell Brook, and then you have ambiguity within his style, because other trainers, they might be able to duplicate the style, but they're not going to be able to duplicate the Dominic Ingle style better than Dominic Ingle. I hope that makes sense. So I think the right trainer is essential, but the right trainer is essential for both. Kell Brook needs Dominic Ingle to be able to get back to a 7, 8, and dare I say it, possibly a 9. And Chris Eubank Jr. needs a trainer that he trusts so that he can have a great camp, great preparation, and that he can nurture his identity and be able to make intelligent adjustments to be an effective fighter. And then the 5th question, when a fighter changes promoters, what should matter most? Money, loyalty, flexibility, or trust? This is a really difficult one. Emotionally, I think loyalty matters. But of course, money matters. In boxing, you have a very short window to make the most money as possible. But it's about a combination of things. You should be able to make a lot of money and also have loyalty with your team. Ideally, you should be loyal to your team. Your team should be loyal to you. It's important to define what loyalty looks like. Can a manager truly be loyal to a fighter? With regards to flexibility, contracts are negotiated, contracts should be studied, the details should be looked at, and you should always try to get the optimum contract. So flexibility is important, and of course, trust is important. What happens if you don't trust your promoter? What happens if you don't trust your trainer? That can be a terrible thing, psychologically for the fighter at least. And then the 6th question is, did Martin Bakole lose momentum because of money, bad preparation, poor management, or simply one calculated risk that went wrong? I think there's a combination of things here. I think the bad preparation, and I'm not going to say he was poorly managed, but I think the bad preparation is probably a product of Martin Bakole's lack of discipline and poor eating habits. So that's definitely been a factor. The calculated risk, I understand why they took the risk. Number 1, there was a big bag involved, i.e. there was a lot of money involved. And number 2, they probably believed that even on that short notice that he could still potentially win that fight. They would have to probably do it within the first 6 rounds. It was a calculated risk that went really badly. However, Martin Bakole can potentially regain his momentum, but in regaining his momentum, he will have to show discipline, and he will have to have consistency, and his promoters and his team will have to get him those fights. And remember, Martin Bakole is a tough fight. Not many people are going to want to take that fight. So for him to attract people to get in the ring, a promoter is going to have to spend a lot of money because it's a lot of risk. So redemption for Martin Bakole is possible, but it is also difficult. And the final question, is boxing really a sport with a business attached, or has the business become part of the sport itself? I don't know if I can even answer that question, because of course, boxing is a sport, and of course, boxing is a business. Is it more a business than a sport? I don't know. Is it more a sport than a business? To me, boxing is mastery. There are things to master. Mastering the jab, mastering timing, mastering the execution of power, mastering the psychology of boxing, mastering the philosophy of boxing, mastering the boxing IQ. But there is a business. There's a business on the front end. And then there's the business on the back end. And all of these factors are very important. Quick announcement. I have a free chapter from my boxing book. So click the link below to visit the landing page and get your free chapter. Remember to check your spam/junk folder if you don't receive it. Also, let me know what you think. Constructive feedback is always welcome.